Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look at installing the Redarc Tow-Pro Liberty brake controller on a 2021 Hyundai Palisade. When adding a brake controller to a vehicle that tows a trailer with brakes is a great idea. It just makes it easier to tow, and if you start to get that sway, you can even it out with a nice manual override, and also you can have proportional braking, so when you're applying the brakes on the vehicle, it'll proportionally add that to the trailer, bringing it to a slower stop. The downside a lot of times that you think of with brake controllers is hitting your knees as you get in. Your traditional brake controller is normally mounted somewhere under the dash, and newer cars are just getting harder to find that spot without smacking your knees on it, and overall they're just pretty clunky. And Redarc's really done a fine job of eliminating that large piece and keeping the footprint nice and small and looking OEM. So even on a Palisade, it doesn't look like a just old farm truck. It has a nice clean look to it with a very easy to use knob that gives you all the same functions that you'd want from a brake controller. The LED light lights up when you have this plugged in, and that's going to let you know exactly where your gain is set. So it's pretty nice too, because as you're lower, it's going to be a cooler blue, and then it'll go to a bright red as you get that intensity going. And your manual override is simple as just pushing a button. So you can set it to wherever you want proportionally, or you can do a manual override, and it's just super easy to use. And a lot of your brake controllers have those big screens, but you really don't need it. Most of the time you don't look at it, you just use the slide for that manual override, and you just set the gain and forget it. And that's the glory of this in a small package. Now this is going to work great if you're pulling a trailer with 1 to 2 axles, and that's kind of where it stops as far as limit. Now if you need to tow something with 3 axles, you're going to want to step it up to the Tow-Pro Elite, and it's going to install exactly the same. The only difference is going to be the amount of axles that you can have on your trailer. Now to begin our installation, the first thing you're going to want to determine is if your vehicle has the factory tow package, and if you're unsure, there's 2 ways to check, and I'll show you how to do that. First way is making sure that you have the hookup to put a 7-way adapter, and that way you can get your brake controller working with those functions. So we're just going to go on our driver's side here. There's going to be an underbody panel, and there's just going to be 3 plastic push pins. So just pop those out by prying at the center part, and the whole thing should come out pretty easily. And then with those out, there's going to be a plastic nut that's straight up. You can see kind of these indents just kind of reach up there, and you can normally get them by hand, or they're simply just kind of threaded on. You can kind of just pull this down and this should come out. So now we can set this aside. Now our car previously had a 4-pole wiring on here, and the plug uses the same plug that you see here. A lot of times there'll be a dummy cap on here, but you're looking for this, and this is how you're going to attach that 7-pole, and you're going to have those wires running up to a plug underneath the dash where you're going to plug in your brake controller, and I'll show you that. The second place you're going to want to check for that connection for your brake controller is going to be right under here. There's going to be this plug that is kind of just taped up to some other factory wire loom, so make sure that you have this plug. And if you don't have these, you are going to have to use an ETBC7 kit, and that install gets a little bit more tricky because you're going to be running power wires up to the battery in the engine compartment, as well as running wires into the interior compartment. So if you have the factory tow package, we found a nice little combination that's going to work really well with the Redarc to make this pretty well plug and play. Now if you do have that factory tow package, just hang along with us and I'll show you how to get yours installed. If you don't have that factory tow package, we actually have plenty of videos available here for the Palisade that uses the ETBC7 kit, and that'll show you exactly how to run yours. Now as far as the 7-pole wiring, super easy here. This kit from Kurt makes it really easy to just plug this in. Just make sure that's snapped. We then have a fuse holder here, so we're going to put the supplied fuse in place. Now as far as mounting up your 7-pole, you have 2 different options, and the first one's going to be picking up this bracket here, and you can self-tap that into your hitch. Just make sure that you have clearance for that plug to open up still completely. Another option is this is an extended bracket that I just put in the vise and bent, and that's going to allow us to get this mounted up, and then we can bolt our bracket onto that, and so that's going to put it in a nice position. Either way, you want to make sure that you have your 7-pole secured. And something I always recommend before plugging it in is taking some dielectric grease and just coating all the contacts here. That's going to keep moisture from damaging all your connections and just kind of prolong the life of the plug. So with that coated up, now we can get this plugged in. And then we'll get it mounted up with our extended bracket. I'm going to go ahead and just tighten our brackets down and our plug to the bracket. Now, some of your kits will come with hardware, some of them will not. So something to keep in mind when picking one is if you need to pick up hardware, you're going to want to choose that kit. And with our extended bracket, it just uses a hose clamp that tightens around it. And to get this nice and close to the hitch but still have clearance, I actually lowered my spare tire. That way I could tighten it down up top and it would be out of the way. And we have our plug nice and close to the hitch. Now I'm just going to take our additional wiring that we have here and I'm going to zip tie it up to the hitch, making sure that I have clearance if I ever need to lower that spare tire down. And we'll make our way over here and we'll bundle up the extra, get this all zip tied up, and get our module mounted as well. And it does come with a double-sided tape for the module. You can place that on a flat surface. You are going to want to make sure that you have clearance for that plastic panel to go up, so you might want to test that, make sure that you have your wires run properly. But the double-sided tape, sometimes over time, that just loses its adhesion. So I would highly suggest using this to zip tie up to something. That way it's going to hold up long term. I've gone ahead and just kind of zip tied everything up. That way it's all contained. And I also made sure to leave a little bit of this wire loom here so it can pass through this gap. That way when we put this back, we won't have to do any trimming. It should fit nice and tight there. So we can go ahead and get our panel put back in place. Unfortunately, Redarc doesn't currently have just a quick adapter to plug into our plug here for our tow package, but we were able to source a CURT one, and that's going to plug in here. Now this is meant for a CURT brake controller, but it's going to give us the wires we need, and that way we're not having to cut this wire, which if you didn't pick up the CURT, you can still plug this into your Redarc by cutting those wires and attaching these with a butt connector. But if you ever decide to change vehicles, unfortunately that plug is going to be permanently cut. Now before we cut our wires, we're going to make sure that it's unplugged. That way we don't have power going through here. And I'm just going to cut these ends off. We'll then just strip these back a little bit. And you are going to need to pick up some butt connectors to make the attachment to your Redarc harness, but 4 of those should be just enough to make this all connected up. So we'll just strip this back a little bit. Pretty easy. We're just going to go color for color. So just match the one from the Redarc up to the one from our CURT adapter. And just make sure when you do a crimp on here, you just kind of give it a test tug. And that way you know that your wires are nice and secure. So now at this point, we're going to take our Liberty and just plug this in, making that connection. So I'm going to go ahead and get this plugged in to our factory wire here. Should hear a nice snap. There we go, so we know that's attached. And this is going to live behind the dash. Now, the big thing that you're going to want to do is figure out where you want your brake controller knob to be. I'm choosing to do it here on the fuse panel for a few reasons, because we know we absolutely have clearance here as the plug does stick out a little bit. It's nice and open. I know that I'm not going to be drilling into anything. And also, if you ever sell the vehicle and you want to take the brake controller, you can replace this pretty easy rather than replacing a piece of plastic along here. If you have a knockout panel, that works well. This one's unfortunately fully loaded, so we don't have any extra buttons that we can tie into. So the fuse panel seems to work well for us. Now when choosing a spot, make sure it's going to be out of the way of the door panels or anything like that, making contact with it, and also that you have that clearance. So I want to mount ours right about here. So we need to drill a hole for this to pass through. We have a locking collar that also will go through. So when choosing a drill bit, make sure it's something the same diameter as this. That way this can slide through and lock. Now on our Liberty, we also need to drill a hole for our LED light. And what I'm going to do is drill out our hole, use this as a template. So you're also going to want an 1/8 inch drill bit. And I'm also going to be using a pick just to mark our spot to make it a little bit easier. So I'll go ahead and make our first drill hole. Now, the one downside to using our fuse panel cover here is this diagram. You might have a hole obviously going through here, so either take a picture for reference, or you can always refer to your owner's instruction manual, and that's also going to lay out your fuses. But the great part is, again, we can always replace this, and we still have access to our fuse panel. There's plenty of slack. That way we can open this up and have our brake controller hang down if we still need to access those fuses. To get our mark made for where the LED light pokes through, there is a diagram in the instruction manual, but I found it's easier to just take your collar and slide that in the hole, and it should be able to pass through. Now, if you need to, you can always enlarge that, but what I'm going to do is make sure that this is in our 12 o'clock position, and then I'm going to take a pick and just poke that spot. And that's going to give me a nice reference mark. That way I can come back with my smaller drill bit, drill that out. Now, it is crucial to all this flashing, go through with either a knife blade or a razor blade and just kind of cut that out, because it does rely on that collar to be able to lock down, and sometimes this can kind of get in the way, make it a little bit harder, and also we want that LED light to be able to really shine through. So I'll get this drilled out real quick. And we can actually take our brake controller and just make sure everything lines up. So you should have that little clear LED fiber optic there, be able to poke through that top hole, and then this should align pretty properly with that bottom hole. So I'm going to go through, get this flashing cleared out. So now we're going to go ahead and get this mounted up. We need to take this little panel piece here, and this is just going to allow that light to shine through here, but also give us an indicator of where what number gain that we have it set to. So we'll just put that in place, take our collar, push this through, and then we'll just tighten this down. Now, do this by hand. It doesn't need to get crazy, but what you can use is a 12mm socket, and just, again, just by hand, that should be enough. Should start tightening down. You're going to want to make sure that the button's still able to be pressed. You should kind of hear a click or feel it. Sometimes you may have to shave a little plastic. We didn't have to, so just make sure all that flashing's gone and you should be good. Now, you're going to want to turn this all the way counterclockwise, and then where we have our reference mark, find the 0 on the knob, and then just press this in place. So we're going to be attaching the connector cord, but before we do that, I want to get everything kind of mounted up. We have our module as well as all of our wires here, and to make this a little bit easier, you really can mount it anywhere, but sometimes space gets tight. I'm going to go ahead and just push on the inside here, and you can see there's a little slot. You can put a screwdriver there if you need to, but just kind of pry this back, and you should have some clips along here. And that's going to open this up and make it really easy to attach this, because when you zip tie up your module, you want to make sure that it's not on wire loom, because it'll move. This actually has to be calibrated by just normal driving, and that way it finds its home. But if you're on a wire, it can move around. So I see a nice solid mounting point. I think I'll be able to get everything zip tied up and get our excess wires up. So I'm going to go ahead, kind of get these bundled up, and then we can go ahead and also get our connector cord mounted up. And having this 90 is going to make it nice for plugging into our brake controller and still having all access here on our fuses. So I went ahead and zip tied up our module using this brace here, and just kind of tucked the excess wire loom back there. There's a nice open spot, and then simply ran the rest of the wires, kind of coiled them over here as far as our connector. You can see there's still access to the fuses, and we still have enough extra length here to where it's not going to be stressing the wire on the brake controller. In order to test to make sure that it's working, you're going to want to hook it up to your trailer. That way it has a load on it. We've hooked it up to our test box, which is going to simulate it being on a trailer. But you should have this blue and green, and that's just going to say that it's trying to calibrate itself. And really just normal driving, just a few braking here and there, this should turn a solid blue, and that way you know you're calibrated before you hit the road with your trailer. And that was a look and installation of the Redarc Tow-Pro Liberty brake controller on a 2021 Hyundai Palisade.